Elden Ring will only get one DLC in Shadow of the Erdtree, but FromSoftware isn't ruling out a full sequel for the RPG. I'm pulling from High and Crier at Games Radar. Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree DLC will be the RPG's only expansion, but developer FromSoftware isn't ruling out other games in the lands between. In a new interview with Chinese outlet Campfire Camp, Elden Ring game director and FromSoftware studio head Hidetaka Miyazaki commented on the possibility of other DLC entries for Elden Ring. FromSoftware does have a history of multiple DLC offerings for their games, with Dark Souls 3 receiving 2 full expansions, for example. However, Miyazaki says that Shadow of the Erdtree will be the first and last Elden Ring DLC. The 2022 game won't be receiving any further DLC after Shadow of the Erdtree launches next month on June 21st, so this next journey into the lands between might well be the final story FromSoftware tells in the Elden Ring world, for now at least. That's because Miyazaki isn't ruling out another full Elden Ring game. The director says that FromSoftware's style of making and developing games naturally leaves the door open to another game set within the Elden Ring's world, although Miyazaki obviously stops short of confirming that there definitely would be another Elden Ring game. Curiously, Elden Ring publisher Bandai Namco previously stated back in 2022 that Elden Ring would be the start of a franchise, quote, beyond the game itself. It's now been well over 2 years since that comment, and we're no closer to learning how or when FromSoftware might expand on Elden Ring's world in other media.
Dang.
Mike,
Okay.
how does this hit you? Chat also for super chats, how does this hit you? Would you want an Elden Ring 2? Do you feel like Elden Ring should be one and done, Mike?
Yeah, of course, I'm making the faces over here, right? Because the one DLC hurts because Elden Ring is so much fun and it's so special, I'm sure, to so many listening and watching out there that you want more of it, right? And so, yes, I do want a sequel. Do I see a sequel in the cards? 100%, right? I think you build off of Elden Ring just like you built off of Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, right? I think people are going to be screaming about Bloodborne soon enough when we talk about this, but like Elden Ring 2 does seem like the next logical step. Having one DLC only also seems like the correct thing when you really think of how big the game is and how much density they put into the map. It seems like, yeah, you put as much work as you can into a large DLC, and then we're probably moving on to the next game. I would agree with that.
Yeah, my big question is how large is the DLC? Me and Andy were going back and forth a little bit. I think we both kind of came down on the same place of you would expect it to be meaty. Coming,
of course,
a year and a half, over 2 years. I don't even know how long it's been now since Elden Ring came out, right? But it's been a while. It's been, I think, a little bit over 2 years by the time we get to this. And so it's been a while. This has been in the oven. They've been cooking. And when you look at the other FromSoftware DLCs, like Mike, you've been playing Dark Souls DLC.
Yep.
They're pretty meaty, right? Like how long would you say the Dark Souls DLC is?
You know, I would put them in, it depends on your speed, right? And like how much you're adventuring, but I would put them at like anywhere between 6 to 8 hours. I think I'd feel more comfortable of saying like number of bosses per DLC. And then I think the explorations in between, but it did feel like normally like maybe 3 to 4 maximum bosses, quote unquote, on each DLC that I played from 1 to 2 so far. But I just finished Dark Souls 1 that had only 1 DLC, and then Dark Souls 2, which had 3. And that one felt meaty, but like when you're playing through it, this isn't an open giant world like what Elden Ring is. It is more contained, larger open spaces that you'll explore, you'll get a lot out of, but it is very much like, hey, go to point A, defeat that boss. Let's go to point B, defeat that second boss. Point C is the final boss there. You've now wrapped up the DLC. They never felt like, oh, I'm here in this DLC for 100 hours, 40 hours, 20, maybe 15 because I'm bad, you know what I mean? But none of the DLCs felt super massive like what I would expect out of an Elden Ring DLC.
That's the thing is, I played the Bloodborne DLC, The Old Hunters, and that felt meaty. It was probably along the lines of, you mentioned 6 to 8 hours for the Dark Souls stuff. I'll probably put Old Hunters for me 10 to 15. Yeah. Even though I will say, again, this comes back to being bad. Half that time was spent fighting Orphan of Kos.
Correct. I think
half that time is spent like fighting these tough bosses that are tougher than what you're getting in the main game.
Of course, and I think that's what the chat will bring up. Is like, oh, is it 8 hours? Is it 15? And really, I think the mileage varies on your play style and how good you are, right? Are you speed running it? Do you know the routes? That'll all change. But yeah, for me, it's all about the bosses. And when I think of Elden Ring DLC, I think of the map, right? Now I go to the map and go, okay, how big is this? Is it that little small island off the side of the map where we went down to that castle with the guy and his daughter, if you remember, and we traveled through the castle below, I don't know, the furthest south little island? That's too small. You know what I mean? Now, is it the size of Limgrave, which was that first big area? That's kind of meaty, but like also,
I believe you
what are we
said
gonna
it was
do?
like maybe a bit around the size of Limgrave. I think they might have even said maybe a bit bigger than Limgrave, but kind of find.com/you're wrong if I messed that up. And yeah, like to that point, the thing with Bloodborne and the Old Hunters, right? Old Hunters, let's say 10 hours for Old Hunters. Maybe this is part of the how long to beat game that we can play ourselves. But I'm gonna say like around 10 hours for that. Bloodborne as a full game took me 30 hours to play through, maybe 30 to 40 hours to play through and beat. When you're talking about Elden Ring, I put in 90 to 100 hours in Elden Ring, and I still got content that I can like dig into with that. I think the expectation that they've set for Elden Ring when I'm thinking about DLC, I'm thinking I'm at least going to get 20 hours out of an Elden Ring DLC. I don't know if that's crazy to say. I would be surprised if they gave us a 30-hour.
I don't think so.
For maybe completionists.
It's interesting, Bless, because like how I kind of broke down Dark Souls 1 and 2 DLCs of like my mind goes to bosses. How many bosses are there, right? Elden Ring is a little bit different of like, yeah, there's probably going to be a large open world space that we're going to explore and hopefully find some dungeons.
Yep.
So like my mind goes to like, how many mini dungeons are there, which has the mini bosses, right? How many large scale, this is the cutscene oriented boss that is true to the story that you have to beat, right? I'm hoping, my hope, 5. You know what I mean? Like 5 large scale, this is the boss. Dungeons, I'm hoping for 4 dungeons. You know what I mean? Like these are kind of minimum. When you really think Elden Ring, I'm hoping for a lot more. I don't know. It's so grand of a game. And that's why I think when we talk about, hey, we're only doing 1 DLC, because it's taken 2 years to build out, hopefully, the biggest DLC possible, which then leads us up to, hey, it's been 4 years or whatever since the last release. Let's put out Elden Ring 2 or 5 years, whatever that takes.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to think this is different from Dark Souls, the originals, where it's very more linear and kind of smaller on the scale than this.
Looking for the perfect gift to celebrate the moms in your life? Aura frames are beautiful Wi-Fi connected digital picture frames that allow you to share and display unlimited photos. It's super easy to upload and share photos via the Aura app, and if you're giving Aura as a gift, you can even personalize the frame with preloaded photos and memories. How do I, Greg Miller from Kinda Funny, know so much about Aura? Because I just gave Jen one for her birthday. I used the QR code on the box to preload it with photos of her and Benny, and when she booted it up for the first time, she got to see a sweet little message from me. I like this frame so much that I am actually legitimately buying one for my mother for Mother's Day. From grandmothers to new mothers, aunts, and even friends in your life, every mom loves an Aura frame. Right now, Aura has a great deal for Mother's Day. Listeners can save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $30 off plus free shipping for their best-selling frame. That's auraframes.com. Use code KINDAFUNNY at checkout to save. And mom, if you see this before you get your Aura frame for Mother's Day, please act surprised.
I'm so fascinated about the idea of Elden Ring 2, because I think the question then becomes, well, I'll throw this question to you, Mike, because you're fresh off of playing Dark Souls and the DLCs and stuff. Do you have a preferred type of FromSoftware game? Elden Ring made the big jump in being open world and being explorable and being huge and all that stuff. Do you miss Dark Souls? Like, would you want them to actually go, hey, let's make either Dark Souls 4 or go back to making a linear type of Souls game? Or do you think after Elden Ring, open world has to be the thing now? You have to give people that big space to explore and give people this gigantic 100-hour game now.
Yeah, that's a great question, Bless. And I think that all goes down to personal preference and probably the mood of my day, right? Because I could go back and forth. I am an open world junkie. I love the Bethesda games. I love Grand Theft Auto. I love the idea of Elden Ring, aka a FromSoftware game, being this giant open world where we can get on horseback and ride from left to right and explore these different areas. But playing Dark Souls 1 into 2 now and going through the back catalog, it's like, oh man, I really like that smaller connected world and how it all built into each other, right? I started in one kind of like swampy, poisonous farm area, went up an elevator, all of a sudden I was in this like hot magma, like forge area. Then you went up another elevator and it was this crazy Dragon's Keep. Like, I love the older FromSoftware games of how they built that world and made it feel big, but also way more contained than what this is. And so I think you catch me on a certain day. I wouldn't say I want one over the other because I enjoy them both so much.
And that's the tough thing is when I'm with you on that. I love Bloodborne, I love Sekiro, and I love Elden Ring, and I like how they tackle all those things differently, right? Yeah. One day I'm going to play through the Dark Souls games and love those too. And I compare it to the same way I talk about Zelda and how you have many different types of Zelda games. You have the Link to the Past style, like top-down 2D Zelda. You have classic 3D Zelda with something like Ocarina or Wind Waker or Twilight Princess. But with Breath of the Wild, you kind of now have this brand new Zelda that has taken over what the main line is. And I think you're going to have people that miss that classic form, and you're going to have people that are also asking for those 2D games as well. And how do you balance all that? I think FromSoftware is in a fascinating place where they don't need to sequelize everything. You know, oftentimes we talk about, oh yeah, you got to make it a franchise because sequels are always going to sell better, and now you have an audience that is invested in it. I think FromSoftware has carved out a good enough reputation, and they've carved out a big enough fan base to where they don't ever really have to make a sequel to sell a game. They can just go, hey, we're making a new Souls-like, and people will show up for it regardless. And I kind of like that because I think that gives them the leeway to go, all right, we can make another open world game, and it could be Elden Ring 2, or it could just be another thing. If we wanted to, we can make another linear game, and it could be Dark Souls 4, or it could just be another thing. And that doesn't lock them in a way. You know, they don't, like, I think if Miyazaki is in the mood to make another, hey, I want to make a linear game, and that had the Elden Ring name attached to it, I don't think that would go over well, right? People want that open world out of it. But you can feed whatever expectations you want because you don't, or whatever you want to do because you don't have to make an IP. You know what I mean? You don't have to make a sequelized thing. I think they're in that special place where they can do whatever they want with the next thing.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I would like to build off of that of like, I think it's fascinating as fans, though, you start to get into the lore, you start to build this world with them, and I do see that sequel really hitting of like, you've built off of what you already know instead of, man, we got to go back to the drawing board and get George Railroad Martin to get back here and rebuild a brand new world. Like, it is tough to like make something so high quality that they do with so many questions and the lore and how you want to follow it all and put all these pieces together of like, you build out the sequel because now we know all that and the fans want to see more of the touchstones that we know instead of, hey, let's get a reset, you know? So it is an interesting idea, but yeah, they can do anything. They're on top of the world. What I will say is, you know, just because my mind is thinking of FromSoft, we just got done with Armored Core.
Yep.
You know, I know this is totally out of left field, but I would say I would never want them to go to a mission structure like that. You know what I mean? Where it's like much smaller. Yeah, with the Souls.
Oh, for sure.
Thing, you know what I mean? I know they probably wouldn't, but you know, you think of like, could they use anything they've learned from Armored Core and put it into these Souls-like games that they're building now for the future? And I just didn't vibe with Armored Core and that mission structure in a Souls-like game that I would want to see in the future.
My prediction / my desire for the future of FromSoft, based on this interview and based on just how they've talked about it in general, I think Elden Ring 2 is a given. I think we're going to get Elden Ring 2. I think the question is more of when do we get it? And I kind of hope we don't see Elden Ring 2 for a very long time. I hope they let it sit. I hope they go, because FromSoftware, again, they've established so many new things and brought forth like so many new types of, I guess, quote unquote Souls, like, or I'll just say different kinds of action games when you look at a Sekiro versus a Bloodborne versus an Armored Core. I hope Elden Ring stays as this generational thing. We don't need another Elden Ring on PS5. Maybe wait until maybe later on in the PS6 era, or maybe we get to the PlayStation 7 or something. Sit on that. Let your next thing be a Sekiro 2. Because I want a Sekiro 2. I want another kind of Sekiro game. Maybe, if we're lucky, work on another Bloodborne.
Maybe.
I want them to sit on Elden Ring because that game is so massive and that game has such an impact. And if you give it a decade and come back with Elden Ring 2 after a decade, the amount of hype, people will be ravenous for it. People will be thirsting for it. And it will have, I think that you get into the GTA 6 territory of, oh man, it's the biggest conversation ever because you only get Elden Ring once in a decade. Like, it becomes this holiday almost.
Yeah, the best move would be take some time, rebuild that giant new open world for Elden Ring, give us a linear one like a Dark Souls or a Bloodborne or a Sekiro. I am interested on that final one we haven't talked about, right? The start of a franchise beyond the game itself, right? Of course, you think of what could they do? And I believe there's a Dark Souls tabletop game out there that you could buy, or maybe it's Bloodborne, but there's definitely a tabletop game. I think that's an easy win right there. Not something that I would go do, but like, I think of Castlevania, the animated series on Netflix. You do that in a Dark Souls or Elden Ring world, sign me up. You know what I mean? Like, I'm there for that, right?
I mean, you mentioned George Railroad Martin, right? Like, get something on HBO. The return of George R. R. Martin to the HBO screen. I feel like doing that with Elden Ring could be huge.
I am impressed that we haven't seen, I'm surprised, not impressed, but I'm surprised that we haven't seen a Elden Ring comic. I always see so
Have we
many
not?
Alien versus Predator, Elden or comics. I always see all these different video games or movies into a comic form. I'm surprised I haven't seen Elden Ring the comic, and maybe they have. But
I think there is.
I haven't seen it.
I saw people in chat mentioning that there is an Elden Ring manga out there.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I think you have that, and yeah, I think you get the board games. I think you get the merchandise and stuff. But I'm curious to see if we get Elden Ring adapted in a bigger way. Because
what a hit.
I think Castlevania would be the perfect analog. I would love to see some kind of like really well done animation
Bloody,
with it.
Just real dark. Yeah, I want that. I'm all about that.
Hell yeah. We do have some YouTube super chats that came in. DJ Kento says, "Give me an Elden Ring tabletop RPG for the homies." I think that'd be fantastic. Tabletop is all the rage currently.
I would love to try. You know what, Blessing? I'm gonna go buy one of those, and I would love to try that with you. I always look at those and go, "Oh man, that's so cool!" A video game that I know is in a board tabletop game. I'd like to try that, but then these tabletop games, you got to spend like 2 nights getting to know how to play it, and then it becomes fun. You know?
Yeah, I mean, and especially if you're talking about a TTRPG, like a Dungeons and Dragons type situation, where it is, hey, we're now for the next year living in the world of Elden Ring and creating our characters and stuff. I think there's really fun stuff you can do with that. I mean, especially for like the super nerds out there, right? Like if you're a TTRPG person and you're also an Elden Ring person, and like you want to go down that Duffy, there's some really fun things you can do. DJ Kento also did another super chat and says, "Yo, let's be real. If you wait a decade for Elden Ring 2, George R.R. Martin won't be around to be involved." I think that's fine though. He was there to kind of set the tone for what the universe is.
Yeah, then you build off of that for sure. You know what I mean? It will be interesting to see. Like you said, your assumption would be Elden Ring 2 has to be this massive open world game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it will be interesting to me. What if they took a hard left turn and was like, hey, smaller project, it's linear, it's like Dark Souls 1 through 3 or Bloodborne that but it's just Elden Ring. You know what I mean?
That's the one thing they could do that I think people would be like, oh, interesting. Like I don't think people would be mad, but I think people would be like, oh, why wouldn't you just do another?
That's what I want to feel. That's the temperature check I want to take. It's like, does Elden Ring have to be open world for you? Or if they hit you with a smaller, normal size game that they usually make, but it's in the Elden Ring kind of lore and universe, would you be okay with that? Would you be turned off all of a sudden, you know?
My knee-jerk reaction would be, dang, I want Elden Ring to be open world. But I think what would happen is that people would have that initial reaction, and then it would come out, and people would play it and go, damn, it's a banger still. Like, as long as it's a banger, people are going to be happy. But yeah, I think there would be that weird knee-jerk reaction of like, why isn't this open world this time? We have one more from Optimus Prime, who says, "I loved how the Dark Souls formula has evolved through Elden Ring, but I think they should create a new IP with this formula. I would like a Sekiro sequel though." Dude, what I want, if I'm talking about my dream FromSoftware game right now, I want in a game that has the open worldness of Elden Ring, like that same kind of open world design and structure, but just go full in on the combat of Sekiro. Yeah, Sekiro still has my favorite combat system of any FromSoftware game, and I think it'd be really fun to have it have a game that takes place in that like medieval fantasy Japan, and like just go hard, like make that world, but make it open world and explorable.
It's crazy that we've gotten a little taste of it. We've gotten people that tried that. Rise of the Ronin comes to my mind.
Rise of the Ronin is a really good
Fallen
example.
Dynasty, kind of similar to that, but not really. But like, we've gotten the taste of like, could we do that? And nobody's really nailed that because we know who would nail that, and it's this team right there. But yeah, that would be pretty badass, Bless.
Somebody in chat mentioned Assassin's Creed Red, right? Like, I'm excited for that, just for, like the Assassin's Creed finally taking place in Japan.
Yeah, and how they've elevated that combat system and like kind of changed it to be more of a Souls-like vibe with the controls and more of the attack patterns instead of XXXY like it used to be.
And somebody mentioned Ghost 2. Like, again, these are all great games to drop and great mentions. But when I'm talking about all that, but the combat system of Sekiro, like double down on it, sings like that thing is so good.
That X factor they got.